listener production.
Hello, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. The latest stats tell us that 2/3 of Australian adults are overweight or obese. Leaving aside the argument about who should or shouldn't fall into those categories, all of us learn habits of diet, exercise and lifestyle in childhood that help or harm our health as adults. Now, the Australian College of Nursing is proposing regularly weighing all kids at school to identify overweight children or those at risk and intervene early to prevent bad outcomes later on. But would that just pile stigma onto an already vulnerable group of kids? The pros and cons of weighing children at school coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Antoinette Lattouf. It is Wednesday, the 18th of September.
G'day, Sasha. Hello, everyone. At least 9 people, including an 8-year-old girl, have been killed and nearly 3,000 wounded. And this happened after pages across Lebanon simultaneously exploded. So according to local media reports, Iran's ambassador in Beirut is among those with injuries. And the health ministry says 200 people are in a critical condition. So the exact number of pages that exploded isn't yet known, but it is understood that the pages were used instead of mobile phones because of Israel's ability to tap and track phones. And Hezbollah has blamed Israel for hacking and detonating the pages. Now, Lebanon's Prime Minister Najib Mikati has called it a serious violation of Lebanese sovereignty. The country's information minister has blamed it on Israeli aggression, and Israel is yet to comment.
This is the third time Lebanon's capital has been targeted in what is widely seen as an escalation in the cross-border skirmishes between Hezbollah and Israel since October 7. It seems that late last month, just when the world was bracing for an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah, tensions simmered, but this could change all of that. The UN says the developments were extremely concerning given the volatile context. Now, Antoinette, when we first saw this morning when we got in, I was kind of confused as to how this could happen. And They don't actually know yet, but there are a couple of expert theories as to how someone was able to make all of these pages detonate at the exact same time. So one theory is that it was a remote hack which caused the lithium batteries to overheat and detonate. And another theory is that it was a supply chain attack. So the pages were tampered with during the manufacturing and shipping process. So that's what intelligence analysts have found is probably the more probable theory, this second one, finding it likely they were implanted with explosives designed to detonate when certain messages were received. It's quite scary to think of how things like hacking and hacking even a supply chain process, we associate hacking with computers or whatever, but this is essentially hacking a device. It's modern warfare. It's quite scary.
Yeah, different manifestations of modern warfare. And I think what else is quite scary, I remember last week of August, everybody was incredibly tense, wondering how Hezbollah would respond, whether things would escalate. And it seemed both parties had stepped back from what would be a devastating all-out war. And I wonder and I fear that this latest attack may change things.
Just before we get into this next story, a warning, it contains details about sexual assault. Sean Diddy Combs has been charged with sex trafficking, racketeering, kidnapping and forced labour 6 months after his luxury homes in LA and Miami were raided. Now, the rapper's indictment has been unsealed following his arrest on Monday with some very full-on details about the alleged abuse women suffered at his hands. It includes them being drugged, the indictment reading that, quote, "For decades, Sean Combs abused, threatened and coerced women and others around him to fulfill his sexual desires, protect his reputation and conceal his conduct," end quote.
So this is all unfolding as we record this morning. The 54-year-old faced court wearing grey track pants and a black T-shirt. It was said that he wasn't cuffed. His lawyers have applied for bail with a $50 million bond. At the time of recording, we don't know if bail was granted. So this is absolutely a wait and see an unfolding story, but not the first time that he's had a run-in with the law over his treatment of women, Sasha.
Yeah, so up until about November last year, he was widely generally considered one of the most influential figures in hip-hop and music. He was well-regarded and, like a hero of the industry. But then come November, he started to get this flood of accusations and lawsuits from women who were accusing him of trafficking. And then in May this year, we actually had a video emerge that was published by CNN, and it shows Combs chasing down his then-girlfriend Cassie in 2016. She was an R&B singer as well. The footage is absolutely horrific, and trigger warning, he's punching and kicking her and literally dragging her. It was awful, but it had reached the statute of limitations, which meant that he couldn't be charged for that particular event. But they had settled out of court a different lawsuit where she had accused him of abuse. Now, he did apologise after that video went public. He said, "I was disgusted when I did it and that's not me." But his apology contradicted years of denials that he was abusive, because while the flood of accusations came late last year, he had faced different accusations in the lead up to all of this. This isn't really that shocking. Now, singer Dawn Richard has also just recently come out against him last week, accusing Combs in a lawsuit of sexual assault, battery, sex trafficking, gender discrimination and fraud. It'll be really interesting to see if he gets bail here because, the evidence against him seems to be mounting up.
Instagram is about to look very different for Aussie teenagers. The social media platform has announced new teen accounts for people under 18 in Australia, America, Canada and the UK. These accounts will be automatically set to private. They'll be on the most restrictive setting for sensitive content. They'll include an anti-bullying feature, an overnight sleep mode, and even a function that'll tell you to get off the app, or tell teens to get off the app if they've been on it for more than an hour. And I don't know if I buy all of this, Sasha, as I'm reading through the details, because social media companies, as we know, are under increasing pressure around the world to make their platforms safer for young people. And as we know in Australia, there are moves by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese to lift the minimum age of social media use to 16. So are these kind of desperate Band-Aid solutions to try and ensure that they remain popular amongst very young people?
I think yes. However, reading through the details, I do think they're actually genuinely trying to be like, okay, we hear you. Yeah. We've listened to parents. We've listened to the governments that keep yelling at us. And, reading through the details, it does seem like they are trying to put in some pretty stringent restrictions in place for teenagers using the app. So the new teen mode will be automatically applied to any accounts that are created going forward. But there are plans to phase it in for existing profiles in the next 60 days. So if you have a teenager at home or a teenager, there's a teenager in your life, tell them that their account's about to look very different. 16 and 17-year-olds, however, will be able to opt out on their own, which of course they would. Why would you keep it? Parents, however, can choose to opt their younger teens out of the new mode if they wish. Now, interestingly, Meta also says it wants to introduce this on its other platforms, i.e. Facebook, from next year. Now, interestingly, the idea that there are workarounds to this stuff, right? Of course. You change your date of birth, whatever. But Instagram has come out and said, no, we've got methods in place to detect when that is happening, including AI. They haven't given up all the details of what these magic tools will be because, they don't want teens to know what they are so that then they can get a workaround to the workaround.
Right.
Parents are also going to be able to access these teen accounts, interestingly. So they'll be able to see who their teenager has messaged in the last 7 days. They won't be able to read the messages, though. They can set hard time limits for daily usage that'll kick the user off as soon as they hit that limit. They'll be able to block their teens from using Instagram at night or during specific time periods. And parents can also view the topics their teenager has chosen in their content options. That one I find really interesting because then you can see what your kids are kind of engaging with. Are they keeping up with the latest celeb gossip, or are they looking into maybe some dangerous wellness trends that, they might need a bit further information on? So I don't know. I think we should look at everything these companies do with a skeptic lens. However, I do think there's some merit to what they're trying to do here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll wait till it rolls out and see it with my own eyes before I'm convinced. But yeah, you've raised some good points.
And the 2026 Commonwealth Games have been saved. Glasgow stepping in to host the event, with Scotland signalling it'll take them on. Now, this all comes, of course, after Victoria gave up hosting rights due to cost blowouts, with the initial budget of $2.8 billion escalating to over $7 billion, according to the state government. But those figures have been questioned by Games officials.
So it's estimated giving up the Games cost the state $589 million. Commonwealth Games Australia will also have to hand over $4.5 million to Glasgow to help pay for the event. And it's only been 10 years since Glasgow last hosted the Com Games. It's understood that the Games will be scaled down with less events, and the overarching questions are about whether the event can survive in the long term, whether it's become too expensive, whether it's lost its relevance since it was first held in 1930. At least in the very short term, that doesn't need to be answered, but it is certainly a question for down the track.
Well, given Glasgow only 10 years ago hosted the Games, they're clearly running out of, think of how long cities have to wait to host the Olympics.
Yeah.
Melbourne was, going off the top of my head,
it's usually
1936.
decades. It's usually decades and decades.
Yeah. And, the Com Games are like, okay, Glasgow, you get a turn again. I don't know. I feel for the athletes, though. It's a really big event for them and they really take a lot of pride in competing. So, 1956 Melbourne. Thank you, producer Chris. I said 36, 56. I was close. 30s was Germany. Anyway, I digress. Time to get into today's deep dive. Thank you, Antoinette, for joining us for the headlines. We're looking into childhood obesity and whether kids should be weighed at school.
Hey, Bension here. Many of us have struggled with our weight or our body image or both at some point in our lives, or know someone who has, and that often starts in childhood. The way we view overweight and obesity has shifted dramatically over the years, from the diet culture of the 1990s and early 2000s, to the body positive movement of the 2010s, to the critical reaction to that movement and beyond. This month, the Australian College of Nursing floated the idea that kids across the country should be regularly weighed at school. The idea is to identify children at risk of overweight or obesity and intervene early to prevent serious health conditions as kids grow older. Now, some kids who are overweight or obese might not be too keen on hearing confirmation from a doctor that they're fat, because bullies at school remind them of it every day. And critics have raised serious concerns this plan could add fuel to the fire of bullying, low self-esteem, body dysmorphia, eating disorders, depression, the list goes on. We actually asked some Year 8s what they thought of the idea.
I don't think it would be a good idea because it could lead to a lot more body image issues with students. It would make me feel very self-conscious because it would mean that I was comparing myself to everyone else, which wouldn't be very good.
Dr. Nick Fuller is an obesity researcher and author of Healthy Parents, Healthy Kids. Nick, welcome to The Briefing. Should we weigh kids at school?
Well, it's certainly a topical conversation at the moment. And I mean, if we look at the data, unfortunately, it's not getting any better. There is this growing prevalence of overweight and obesity. And unfortunately, it's the children and the adolescents that we're particularly concerned about because they're becoming or clinically diagnosed as overweight or having obesity at an earlier age and developing metabolic disease. But the question is more so, what would we be doing with these measurements if we're actually taking measurements within schools? Because we need to prevent this reactionary response that we are seeing in the real world, where even GPs, healthcare nurses are reacting to a one-off measurement because the child is supposedly in an overweight range and then advising them to be on a diet, telling the parents to put their child on a diet and to start restricting their food intake so that they come back into a healthy weight range. This is absurd and this is what we need to prevent.
If we did weigh kids in school, what would it look like? How would it actually work in practice?
Well, it's been tested in other countries. So the US did roll this out and they're actually pulling back on that now. So it obviously hasn't worked. And I guess also to put into perspective, up until the age of 5 years, we are doing this already, okay? From the minute we're born, your child is taken for a series of regular health checkups at the primary healthcare provider, usually the GP or family healthcare nurse. Happens over regular time intervals every few weeks when you're first born, and then it spreads out over every few months, and then less frequently as they grow and develop between sort of 2 and 5 years of age. Now, what we're doing with those measurements is we're plotting them over time on different age for weight graphs. So there's one set of graphs that we use for birth to 2 years, and then we use another set of graphs from 2 to 18 years of age. Now, the reason why we keep measuring and use age-appropriate graphs up until the age of 18 is because we're growing and developing so much during that time, not just height, weight, but also our brain development, which continues on into our 20s. So what we would be doing is taking a measurement, plotting it against these weight for age graphs, and seeing how your child is growing and developing according to population norms over time when you're comparing it to children of the same age and gender.
There are a lot of people who might be listening who would take issue with the notion that being overweight is bad inherently. And certainly over my lifetime, we've had a very different conversation change over what overweight is and what obesity means. Speaking as a doctor, in your opinion, what is wrong with a child being overweight by whatever measure it is that we're using to come to that conclusion?
Yes, it is a problem because we are fixating on weight. We're fixating on a number and in many instances a one-off number when we need to be looking at a growth or the child's growth and development over time. What is happening with that child in terms of their measurements, not just within a given year, but across years and up until, teenage years and beyond. For a long period of time, particularly as adults, we've been using this number, a crude measure being the BMI, which puts us in either healthy weight range, overweight range, or an obesity weight range. We now know that we should be moving away from that. It's not taking into consideration a lot of different factors. We are all different shapes and different sizes. We can be healthy at any age, but that's providing that you are following the principles of a healthy lifestyle. Okay, so we do know from our research at the University of Sydney that it does come down to 6 simple steps or 6 simple principles around diet, exercise and sleep health. These are the 3 key pillars of any evidence-based lifestyle program and improving health in the family home. So what we need to be doing is equipping parents with these 6 simple steps so that they can be making changes within the 4 walls of their family home, because if we can get it right from the start, we can set up the next generation so they do not have this lifelong struggle with weight and health that many of us as adults currently have.
You said that this didn't work in the US and you've expressed some skepticism about this plan just now, but isn't school one of the few places in which the society has access to a child in a way that is not dictated by the parent? There might be a lot of vulnerable kids who are vulnerable to being overweight or obese in households where they might not be going to the doctor on a regular basis. So isn't school that one spot that there can be early intervention, there can be those education programs that mean that both the child and the parent understand what they need to do to improve their health?
Yeah, this is a very good point you raise. It's not the weight measurement or weight measurements themselves. It's, again, what we're doing with that data. Okay, so we do need to be monitoring our child's physical health and mental health development. Now, when it comes to physical health, 3 of those key measures are height, weight, and head circumference, and we do need to continue on with those up until the age of 18. And like you mentioned, it's not often done in the GP or family healthcare nurse world, and as a result, we're not getting a good indication of how our child is growing and developing. They might then develop a weight and health problem, and we know that if you have a weight problem during adolescence, you're 80% more likely to carry that into adulthood. Now, that's quite scary because, again, if we get into that problem of having being overweight or clinically diagnosed as, having obesity, it's so hard to regain control and to get back down to a normal, healthy weight. Obesity is a science, and often healthcare professionals, GPs in particular, aren't given that education during their tertiary training to know how to advise on this very problem. So what we need to be doing is reacting to the problem in that instance by teaching the parents and the educators on what those 6 key pillars are for healthy habits in the family home, because then that will allow a child to grow into a healthy weight.
As we know, obesity is not the only relatively common medical condition afflicting a lot of kids. Depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, bullying is very common in schools. Couldn't you see a scenario in which kids are lining up for their yearly weight check and some of them are deemed to be overweight and some of them aren't? Isn't that a potentially toxic dynamic in the schoolyard?
Absolutely. I mean, this wouldn't actually happen where kids are lining up and the measurements are taken in front of others. But there still allows for that comparative or sort of competitive nature to be introduced because kids start talking about their weights. We know that bullying is one of the number one contributors in schools around, physical and mental health. So we do need to prevent this, and it can be done in a more confidential environment. And this is why if we are going to continue and getting more robust data around our child's health and development, we do need to be encouraging parents to go to the healthcare professionals, GPs, healthcare nurses, and doing that within the schooling period as well, because at the moment we're sort of stopping up until the age of 5 and then not getting a good picture of what's happening beyond that period of time. But remember, we do need to stop reacting to a one-off measurement. If your child is at one particular time in an overweight or obesity range, do not worry. We all grow and develop at significantly different rates. We hit milestones at different times. And if you are continually in that overweight, obesity range, we just need to reevaluate the healthy habits in the four walls of the family home.
Over the past couple of decades, the conversation publicly about weight has changed significantly. Certainly, it used to be a lot about personal responsibility and dieting and diet culture. And there seems to be now a consensus that that framework is not helpful. But also, we know that overweight and obesity contributes to a whole bunch of other potential health conditions, including diabetes, etc. So how should we be framing weight now? What is a helpful way to be thinking about weight that's not diet culture, but it is also not we're ignoring the problem altogether?
Well, there's two important points to raise here. You just alluded to one of them. Overweight and obesity definitely does significantly contribute to your risk of developing metabolic disease like type 2 diabetes, heart disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, etc. But as I mentioned earlier, you can be healthy at any size, but that is only providing you are following the healthy principles of a healthy lifestyle around diet, exercise, and sleep health. So we're talking about retraining our brain back to nature's treats. So reach for nature first. Okay, we're talking about the full rainbow, making sure that every meal is balanced with whole grain carbs, protein, and a source of healthy fat. Because in the modern day environment, we're cutting out certain foods or food groups because the dieting industry has made us or led us to believe that certain foods are fattening, but they're the very foods often like whole grain carbs and dairy that we should be including because they contribute to long-term weight management, healthy weight management. We should also be looking at the meal time. It's something that we've got the wrong way around in the modern day environment. We burn the calories 2.5 times more efficiently in the morning versus the evening time. So breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Dinner should be the smallest from a portion size perspective. That's for adults. For children, it's all about mealtime feeling fine, sitting around the dinner table and enjoying that time together and role modelling positive, healthy habits. Monkey see, monkey do. You'll overcome a lot of that food fussiness and stubbornness when it comes to presenting them with healthy food. When they can see you eating that healthy food in front of them, they're very good at regulating their calorie intake across the course of the day, so let them eat according to their needs. And then it's also about including activity as part of your day-to-day life, not fixating just on when to include structured activity, but how to include incidental activity. We evolved to move, but we drive everywhere from A to B in the modern day environment. We're getting very little movement. We're sedentary. It's contributing to metabolic disease. And then the last one is around sleep health. We know that devices are keeping us up because they're the last thing we use before we go to bed. They're suppressing melatonin production. It means it's telling your brain it's daytime instead of nighttime. We have a hard time falling asleep, staying asleep. Now, when I take blood samples off patients the next day after one night of sleep deprivation, their hunger hormones are going bananas. ghrelin level, for instance, the hunger hormone produced from the stomach acting on the brain, the clever part of the brain called the hypothalamus telling you to go and eat for more food, it's going up. So after a night of sleep deprivation, you're hungrier, the kids are hungrier because they've also been on the devices. It has this flow-on effect. You're more likely to make poorer lifestyle choices, go to the vending machine when you're looking for the high, as opposed to eating the nature's treats. You're more likely to neglect the physical activity because you're tired and lethargic. So this is why it is important to be fixating on not just diet, but also how to change your relationship with physical activity and exercise and improve sleep health. And then the last one comes down to that messaging I was saying at the start. Focus on health, not weight. Particularly relevant for kids and adolescents. They're growing and developing, remember, so much during these years. We need to look at weight as a continuum over time. And as an adult, don't fixate on that number on the scales. Fixate on what your health is doing over time. Go to your GP and get some bloods taken. Get your blood pressure checked because that tells a much better picture of your health than just a number on the scales being your weight.
Dr. Nick Fuller, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
Thanks very much for having me on.
Dr. Nick Fuller there. That's it for this episode of The Briefing. If you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast and on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. We'll be back in your feed this afternoon from 3. I'm Bension Siebert. Catch you next time.
Listener.